Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Independent Sector's Week in Washington call. My name is Allison Grayson, and I'm with Independent Sector. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Independent Sector is a national membership organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs, working to ensure that all people in the United States thrive. Today, we'll be joined by Washington Council Ernst & Young's Wes Coulomb and Catherine Beane with the YWCA. Welcome, Wes and Catherine. As a part of our webinar feature, all lines are currently muted, and we'll pause periodically for questions. To ask a question, please type it in the Q&A box or email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. This webinar will be recorded and posted on the IS website and emailed to you within 24 hours. And when you leave today's webinar, you'll be prompted to take a survey, which we encourage you to fill out because it helps us create content that's tailored to your needs. With that, we appreciate your attendance and look forward to your questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. And so far, our standard format is to begin with just a sense of what on earth is happening in Washington, D.C. right now that nonprofits would be interested in learning, particularly related to COVID. So I'm going to start with you, Wes, and see if you can give us just a lay of the land.
Sure. Thanks, Allison. Happy to be with you this afternoon, everyone. I'll give you a quick update on the schedule for the House and the Senate and talk about kind of what's next on the horizon in the legislative front. The Senate came in session this week earlier than the House, processed mostly some nominations and war powers legislation, and then we'll be back in session next week as well. The House is not in session this week. They're coming back, scheduled to come back on Monday of next week. And the big item that they're working on is a fifth bill to address COVID-19, the coronavirus impact on the health and the economy. As you know, they passed 4 bills thus far, the biggest of which was the CARES Act end of March, a large $2.2 trillion package. Some more other funds were passed a few weeks ago to kind of plus up some of the small business PPP loan programs. And now they're looking at another fifth bill, another large package to kind of process through the House and the Senate. The state of play of this is it's really being driven by Speaker Pelosi and the House Democrats in coordination and cooperation with Leader Schumer with the Senate Democrats. We understand that both Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer have been working together on a package and have made some initial comments about this is going to be a large, broad package to help provide relief to individual taxpayers, healthcare workers, and to help address some of the issues impacting our economy. They expect it to probably come out sometime early next week, maybe some details over the weekend, but probably not released fully until Monday of next week. The House comes back in session. And there'll be a big piece of that will be more funding for state and local governments, help aid for the states, as well as expansion and modification of the unemployment insurance program. I know that the nonprofit sector is interested in making some modifications there. Another round potentially of stimulus checks to give individuals some funds in their pocket. Also some healthcare items in there, potentially expansion of COBRA to allow employees who've been laid off from their jobs to buy back into their healthcare plan of their employer. So that's kind of like, you know, obviously another big round of appropriations I think will be in there as well as part of the package. Some funding for various areas that were also in the CARES Act, as well as some new areas for healthcare workers, et cetera, as part of the bill. We'll see what the details look like when they come out on Monday. From the Senate standpoint, it looks like this will be more of a House-driven or partisan exercise in the sense that Leader McConnell has not been as eager to move forward on another package and put out some other priorities such as liability protection for employers that bring their employees back when they bring them back, not getting sued for certain healthcare issues, as well as the president and the administration have come out with some ideas as well, such as a payroll tax cut for individuals and some other things that they've been looking at. So I think right now, really, we're kind of watching to see what the House reveals next week when Speaker Pelosi unveils her package, and then how the president and the Republicans respond to that. This is going to be, my sense, a several-week process. Not going to go very quickly. and we'll see if the House decides to move it forward to the House on a partisan vote, or if they want to kind of put out as a marker on Monday and then have the Republicans react to see if they can find a way to get a partisan or bipartisan agreement before they move it through the House. So more to come on that. It's a little bit detailed. Happy to answer any questions or talk about other issues as well.
So I want to make sure people know at this point, we're happy to take some questions for Wes about what is happening on the Hill. And again, you can type those into the Q&A box or send us an email at publicpolicy@. Wes, I have a question for you, and also Catherine, you're welcome to join in this conversation as well. But in the last, I would say last week and a half, a lot of nonprofit advocates that are interested in making sure policymakers are addressing the next round of nonprofit needs have been speculating about what are policymakers' priorities for this next package, how do we align behind those priorities, and then sort of when do we need to communicate those up to the Hill. And it was a lot of, well, it'll be a while, oh wait, you should hurry up. So in the process that you just laid out, if organizations are interested in reaching out and educating policymakers about their needs to make sure that they are considered in this next bill, where in the process and what timing should they consider in terms of how they do outreach, and who should they focus on talking to?
Good question. I think, as I mentioned, this can be driven, kind of first step will be taken by the House. And so I think the focus will be on the House Democrats mostly because they're drafting the bill. My sense is they're pretty close to finalizing the package, but obviously it hasn't been released yet, so nothing's final till it's been put out. So there's some time today, tomorrow, and I'm sure they'll probably finish up some of the details over the weekend if they do release it on Monday. Obviously, as I mentioned, it'll be kind of a first, a proposal, and there'll be time to also weigh in with the Republicans in the House and what they want to see in the package. As well as the Senate will be a key because they'll have to have their response to it. Something they need to pass. Speaker Pelosi can pass something through the House on a more partisan basis with her members voting for it. And they'll need to have a lot of Republican support to get it passed to the House floor, but to get it to the Senate floor, there must be a bipartisan agreement. Obviously, the Senate is controlled by Republicans, and so Leader McConnell will drive the agenda on how he puts legislation to the floor. So it's also key to weigh in with the Senate Republicans on what they want to see as part of this package and as it goes forward.
So there are a lot of questions coming in now. I'm just going to run through them. One question is, do potential liability protections, espoused by Leader McConnell apply to nonprofits or just for-profit businesses?
Good question. We've not seen legislation, but I assume it would apply to all employers who have employees and have a workplace. And so I assume that would include both for-profit and nonprofit businesses in the definition. But we haven't seen detailed language yet.
So it's a TBD.
Yes.
But we're optimistic that we're included. Another question is, there's been reporting that Dem's next package might include enhancements to the PPP loan program, including waiving the 500 employee cap, restrictions on what the loan funds can be used for, and other sort of expanded eligibility. Any inside information on how likely these things will be included in the next package?
Yeah, good question. I think there's the last package they had to increase some funds for it. It expand the program to provide some set aside funds for smaller financial institutions, small banks, FIs as well, to help access funds for certain communities that may not get it with bigger banks. And so that was part of the last package. I think there is and the overall package is going to run out of funds soon. And there's also interest that they want to kind of broaden the impact of that. So I don't know if they will just waive the 500 employee limit, but they are looking at potential increases in that amount, that level, for what they would go to. That's something on the table as part of the conversation.
And we have one more question we've started answering, which is someone just wanted a general sense of the policies we think may be included in the package that are beneficial to nonprofit organizations. So we talked about, and maybe didn't clearly celebrate enough, the fact that SBA loans technically are beneficial to nonprofits. We're eligible to apply for them for the first time ever. So I think that's a victory in the sector we should celebrate, just the fact that we can even still be in this conversation. But Wes, as you just mentioned, getting from the point of being eligible to actually having money in hand is a process. So we're still figuring out how nonprofits can navigate that process and what assistance they may need to do that. Are there other provisions that look likely to be included in this next round of legislation that would benefit nonprofits that we're keeping an eye on?
On the in addition to the PPP program, there's also some efforts to expand some of the Federal Reserve facilities for larger organizations to be helpful nonprofits. Currently, the Fed term sheets they've come out with so far have not included nonprofits in there. The statute says that they could be and should be included. So we're kind of working on that, and we'll see if some legislation is part of that to help clarify that or expand that. Also, there's been an effort to work on the CARES Act provisions regarding charitable deductions. One is the $300 UCD provision. The hope is to find a way to get that increased and increase that amount in there, as well as expand. I think the idea would also expand that to include 2019 tax returns, not just 2020 tax returns, so people can take advantage of it now rather than wait till a tax return is filed next year.
I'm going to pause because Catherine, you are on the inside in terms of conversation. So what are you hearing?
I hear a lot of the same, and I would just add to that one of the big gets out of the CARES Act that was super important for YWCA was emergency grant funding through some of the existing federal funding streams. So for us as a network, an additional $45 million going to the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. Sorry, the cat jumped on the table. You just saw her tail. The Emergency Solutions Grant, which gets resources to nonprofits that are providing shelter for homeless individuals. Childcare and Development Block Grant, there was $3.5 billion, and then some additional funding for Head Start. And I highlight those things because, again, those monies get distributed from the feds to the state, and then they get pushed out into communities to whoever those service providers are. And there's, in the broad nonprofit sector set of asks, there's really 4 main areas, and Wes has hit all of them. And I would just add, the 4th area is really around additional emergency funding that can be rapidly distributed through these formula grants and whatnot that exist. We're pushing hard for some additional childcare monies, that there was a first investment in that, but much, much more is needed to get that sector back open as the workforce goes back to work, and some additional housing and other just very routine needs are escalating as our economy, as folks are laid off in the economic situation today. Meals for seniors, right? All of the food bank work and, a lot of the relief that is needed on the ground for individuals hopefully will be flowing through the nonprofit sector.
Absolutely. We tend to, when we highlight what is being covered on this call, it's usually sort of things that apply to all nonprofits, but some of the biggest strides we're seeing are in the appropriations to individual programs or subsectors. So it's really good to note that, and that advocates are succeeding in those areas and getting critical resources down to the community level. One more question is a follow-up from a discussion last week, Wes, around the Department of Labor guidance on nonprofits to self-insure unemployment claims. And there was conversation that maybe this next relief package could include legislation to try to correct for that guidance. Have you heard anything else about that prospect?
Yeah, good question. I've not. I've heard conversations that they need to be interested in trying to correct that or to fix that, but I've not. I can't tell you definitively that it's going to be part of the House package as of yet. but hopefully.
Yep. It's another wait and see.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Wes. I think we're going to pivot for a minute. So Catherine's kind enough to join us, although she is advocating on all of these issues that we just talked about. One of the reasons we asked her to talk to us today is, in addition to all these issues, there's another issue that there's a lot of advocacy around, excuse me, right now in Washington. And ironically, it is the issue that we thought we would not be able to get away from this year. And for some reason, it is not in the news cycle, which is the election and voting. So Catherine, thank you for joining us today. And can you tell us just a little bit more about your role and sort of YWCA's mission in general?
Sure, happy to. Thank you so much for having me on. So YWCA USA is 162 years old, and we have a mission to eliminate racism and empower women. Throughout our work, we really take a program-informed approach to policy, and I've got the good fortune of being the Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy. So really, we're a federated model with a small national office and 200 local YWCAs around the country in 45 states and DC. And it's really a grassroots network, if that makes sense. So our biggest advocates that we're able to directly engage are those CEOs and program staff from our network, who then in turn are in touch with the clientele that they serve and their community members as their grassroots constituency. And my job is really to help set our agenda, to work the Hill and the administration, as well as bring to bear our grassroots engagement to try to push for the policy solutions that really advance our mission. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've gone through a new strategic business planning process where we are ratcheting up our work on the appropriations end, because as you noted, for us, that appropriations process is part of the support that we're able to drive to our local level so that they can fulfill mission and meet needs of women, children, and families and communities around the country. I'd say close to 60% of our local associations, they're all a little bit different, but they do domestic violence and sexual violence services. They provide those, whether that's a shelter or a hotline, a legal advocacy program where they're helping survivors navigate police and courts, kind of a variety of DV and SA services. Roughly half provide some form of childcare, another half do housing, and then a lot of job training, economic advancement type stuff for women, some programs that are geared towards young women's empowerment. Others are supporting senior women who are either living in a facility together or needing job transition support. So it's a lot of, each YWCA is really developed to respond to unique needs in their own community. So they all have a kind of different mix of services that they provide, but we're all united around this mission to eliminate racism and empower women.
There we go. So you do a lot of work, even when we facing a pandemic. I can't imagine that the current environment has decreased demand for services. So just really quickly, what are your organizations experiencing on the ground? We're trying to get a sense of how our nonprofit individual experience compares to others. So I'm just curious what you're observing.
Yeah, I think that the story from town to town is community to community is very much the same, and that is escalating need for food, escalating need for shelter, for housing that is affordable or free, if you will, because a lot of folks have lost jobs. Safety, domestic violence goes up during times of crisis like this, and with more and predominantly domestic violence is experienced by women. Probably 90-95% of all domestic violence cases are actually a male perpetrator and a female or survivor, victim who hopefully survives the experience. So it's a lot of what we call gender-based violence. So it's very gendered in its impact, but also motivations. And so we're seeing increased risk of domestic and sexual violence happening inside the home at a time when everybody's stuck at home together, which escalates tension. So that was a long-winded way of saying more crisis happening in the DVSA world, more demand for services and less opportunity for folks to actually find services that they need safely. On the childcare front, it's interesting. We do a biweekly survey of our local associations to try to gauge, how much they're able to take advantage of PPP, what kinds of things are they seeing on the ground, and the three main areas of programming that we have surveyed over the last 6 weeks have been DV, childcare, and then other kinds of housing outside of domestic violence. And in the domestic violence and housing spaces, we see spikes, incredible spikes in need, declining resources to support. A lot of our local associations have had changes in grants that can come through, as well as canceled fundraisers, which they rely on to support their services. And on the childcare front, it's been interesting because of mandatory stay at home, a lot of those childcare centers have had to close. And so they're struggling to stay in a position to, as the states begin to open, to meet new and changing circumstances. So bring people back to work who may or may not have childcare arranged if their school-age kids are out of school now, the schools aren't opened again, or because ratios are falling, so that classrooms need to be smaller in childcare settings in order to have enough distance between kids and do some infection control work. It's just it's already an expensive endeavor, and it's really hard to operate in those circumstances. And they are only just now getting to a space where they can start to open those doors again. So again, the demand fell for childcare, programs closed, but now they're having to reopen under really different circumstances. And then the last thing I'd note is there are about 32 YWCAs around the country who have stayed open precisely to provide childcare services for first responders and essential personnel. So those folks are continuing to do that work under really stressful conditions.
So there is sort of no shortage of demand and for services and need for services. And a lot of these are critical sort of life-sustaining services or services that speak to individual safety, right? So
exactly.
These issues.
Exactly.
Why on earth are we talking about elections and voting?
Great question. Right. So why are we doing this now when we're, I think the thing that our YWCA share with every other nonprofit and small business, frankly, is everybody's shut inside. How can we take care of our employees? How can we shift our business model? Because even nonprofits talk about business models so that they can still be in service when they're able to, when the states and communities start to open back up. We at YWCA actually think that civic engagement is essential to our mission of empowering women and eliminating racism. And here's why. A lot of people talk in terms of health of democracy, and that's an important point. But what we really strive to do is ensure that regardless of who a person's going to vote for, we want to maximize participation so that every voice is heard in the process and the processes that exist. We think that from a values and mission focus, that is incredibly important work to do. Candidly, there's also a really practical reason to do it, which is, if we can say in each election cycle, we are engaging X number of people, 25,000 women, or 25,000 of your, maybe it's 2,000 of your constituents in this particular place when we go to the Hill, and we're educating them on issues so that they are informed voters who are registered to vote, or they're already registered, have made a pledge to vote. We find that ups our ability to be persuasive with policymakers that they need to pay attention to this. Now, I used to work for one of the largest unions in the country doing policy work, and the thing that I was fascinated by was their ability to command policymaker attention from a power perspective, because if they needed to mobilize their people, they could, right? So whether you like unions or not, whatever the organization, that notion of educating folks on the issues and mobilizing people to act is central to power. And politics and Congress and government are nothing if not all about persuasion and power. So that I think is, I think our civic engagement work is one of our demonstrations of an ability to mobilize communities, impact communities, and really command the attention that we think we need and deserve from policymakers.
Absolutely. And I think when you described your services earlier and the communities that YWCA serve, these are also the communities that seem to be disproportionately impacted by both the health and economic fallout of the coronavirus. So these are exactly the people we want to empower and make sure elected officials are paying attention to their needs in the recovery process of COVID, right?
Absolutely. It needs to be more than just me and my little privileged, I've got a law degree, I went to college, grew up in a middle-class family. You know, I've got a kitchen table and I can put food on my table every day, and, you know, bedrooms for my kids and all those other things. I don't have, my voice is important, but what's really important in terms of driving policy solutions is that the people most directly impacted by the policies have a way to express what they need. We as an organization, I as an advocate really believe that, and kind of now more than ever, having those who are most directly impacted from a range of experiences, right? If I get COVID or my kid does, I'm going to need to have a voice in this process, but so do folks that don't have the advantage that I have of being in the job I have and knowing what I do. So we look at this as opening doors for folks who are impacted by an array of issues with a real particular focus on women and girls. But again, looking at communities of color and the most marginalized to make sure that there's a space at the table for folks to weigh in.
So I think everybody's convinced this is an issue that needs to be addressed and in sooner rather than later. So what can organizations do in twofold? One, what can they do to address sort of the way that policymakers are talking about elections in a COVID reality? And two, what else should they be doing around voter engagement?
Sure.
Lift things.
Sure. So we have joined in with some of the civil rights coalitions that we're a part of, and really calling for resources to be made available at the state level in order to, I hate talking about security because that sounds like Russia, right? And that's not what I'm talking about, but to ensure personal safety and community physical safety in the elections. We very much are advocating for an expansion of the ways that people can vote and participate in elections. So calling for greater use of mail-in ballots. Some of the innovations that some states are already using in terms of not opening up elections, not just on the Tuesday of election day, but for a period of time before that, so you can stagger who comes when, and really help keep some of that social distancing in place that helps people stay physically safe. I think all of us expect that COVID will still be rearing its ugly head come November. And so putting in place really practical measures that help ensure the physical safety and health of all in our communities is something that we're really pushing for. And I see a question in the chat box about the COVID legislation, and many of us are pushing for and hopeful that there will be funding that is provided in addition to the small amount that was in the CARES Act, additional funding that goes to states in order to really bolster that voting apparatus and infrastructure so that there's greater participation that's possible, and that people don't have to trade their health for exercising the constitutional right to vote.
Awesome. And one more question for you is, in addition to the COVID legislation or lobbying in general, what else could nonprofits be doing right now to sort of bolster, civic participation, but particularly voting participation?
Yeah, we like to think about this work along a continuum of engagement. So people talk about a ladder of engagement. Tend to talk about a continuum, but that there are easy light lifts that anybody could do. And that's a post on social media about upcoming, how important the right to vote is, right? Or when the registration deadlines are in your state, when National Voter Registration Day is, all the way to hosting town halls and voter registration drives at a local level, right, which our independent YWCAs may undertake. The advantage that we all have is that there are some organizations, our allied organizations, who are out there with the resources of information, toolkits, tips and strategies to meet different kinds of circumstances, who are out there ready to help us in the nonprofit sector, right? So whether you look at Nonprofit Vote, which now houses National Voter Registration Day, which is in September, and it's a nice rallying cry to get everybody registered to vote. You can partner with them, either lending your name or engaging your networks as opposed to a financial sponsorship. You can do some of that work. You could call on Boulder Advocacy to learn more and help educate your own networks about how this is 501c3 safe, kind of the rules of the road to keep it 501c3 safe. Like, what is it that we can do, and where are the bright lines that we shouldn't cross so that we keep our C3 status safe? We educate every single cycle. We educate our local associations about this because they're nervous, right? They're nervous about the words lobbying and they're nervous about voter registration because they feel like, oh, we're going to get in trouble or the IRS will yank our C3 status, when in fact you can do this work very comfortably and very safely. And we as an organization don't have to do the heavy lift of creating that training or that information from scratch. There are great partners out there that we draw on and that all of us can draw on to help mobilize our sector and help make this a regular part of the work that we do. If you're a human service provider, you can have voter registration forms available for pickup. You can do something simple like when we get back to our offices, or like if this was my normal workspace and I was going to be interacting with clients, right, which happens now in human services, I could have a poster up there behind me instead of that picture of my kids that talked about, 2020 election, voter registration deadline is such and such, right? There are different ways that you can integrate even, the poster in the office into your virtual office for the work ahead. And again, I haven't said this yet, but I really think it's important to say, we don't see this as partisan work. It is explicitly nonpartisan work. There is no electioneering, there is no campaigning going on. We're really careful about what we do and how we do it in order to protect our C3 status. And it doesn't matter whether you're in a blue state or a red state, it's about mobilizing people to exercise their right to vote. And in some locations, sure, because of just pure numbers, that's going to be maybe one party or, more Democrats register over here in this urban area. But in this rural area, we're really talking about most likely more folks who are of a different political party, right? And so, being nonpartisan in our approach, making sure that we are pushing this everywhere across our network equally, puts us in a space where it's not about which party gets the advantage. It's about people's participation and having a voice in the process that then determines, what resources come down, how the CARES Act gets delivered. I mean, there's so many things that this impacts at a practical level, including our ability to deliver on our mission of empowering women and eliminating racism. I could go on, but I won't.
In the meantime, we'll just say yes, absolutely. So I'm going to pause for a minute and give people a chance to ask a question. Again, you can ask it in the Q&A box or email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. I just want to share a reaction, and then we have one question sort of left over from the last round of questioning that I think you may be able to answer. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
We talk a lot in the nonprofit space about elections and staying nonpartisan and saying, oh, but you can help with voter engagement through voter registration. Like, that gets a lot of attention. But there's a lot of registered voters who just don't vote.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of data that shows that nonprofits were really good at getting people to actually show up to vote as well.
Yep.
In part, it is assumed because we are really trusted as institutions and sources of information. And one of the things that has really stuck with me is there's something that some people are calling the explanation gap. That a lot of times people don't vote because they don't understand how the public policies that are being debated in Washington, D.C. or among the candidates actually impact their lives. And who better to sort of translate that down to their clients than nonprofits, in explaining, we know people are, debating universal health care. Here's how this translates into what this would look like in how your life would look different right now. Or we know people are talking about, who knows, but the public education role, which then translates to voter education role of nonprofits in an election year, that really has nothing to do with get out the vote explicitly, but it actually gives voters the motivation to go vote. I think is a role that often is sort of under-recognized, but is really important.
I think that's absolutely right. Lots of different ways to make that happen. I know we're going to be working with recognizing that our locals are really trying just to keep the doors open right now. At a national level, we're really realigning our staffing so that we can give a little bit more support. So meaning we will produce our toolkits, but then we're probably also going to pick some places where if a local doesn't have a staff member to stand up a virtual town hall, right? Or do that issue education where we provide a greater level of technical assistance, especially because Congress, we all know in the election year time frame, come August, there's not much that's going to push forward there. Might have a few people twiddling their thumbs, so we're going to redeploy them at our national office level on just providing technical assistance to those locals to help kind of stand up these efforts and help them just make it easy for them to participate. And I think that that's whether it's through a partner organization, you decide to give me a call and say, hey, we want to learn more, or Nonprofit Vote or Boulder Advocacy or Independent Sector, any other groups, right, that are out there who are committed to this work, being able to say, hey, we want to make it easy for our people. What's some low-hanging fruit that we can have them engage in, and then help them do that work is certainly a commitment we're making, and that we hope that others will join us in.
Awesome. Carla McKinney asked the question. Carla, if you could email that question to us at publicpolicy@independentsector.org. I think we've run out of time, actually. We will do our best to follow up and provide.
I don't have an answer on that one.
I gather that. So we'll do our best to follow up and either identify an answer for you or maybe connect you with someone who may know the answer. So Catherine, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone joining us. And I just want to remind you, if possible, please fill out the survey we send at the end of this call. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.